All right, I guess I'll go ahead and start. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dan Gallahan. I'm the director of the Division of Cancer Biology here at the NCI, and together with Center for Scientific Review, we're putting on this webinar for everybody with the lofty title of Getting a Grant from the NCI. What I realize that there's a number of ways to get grants at the NIH, but this is primarily from the point of view of cancer researchers. But we'll talk more about that as we go along. So as I said, getting a grant from the NCI is not an easy task, and that's one of the reasons we like to run these seminars. We usually run these at AACR, but for logistics reasons, we weren't able to do this. But this is a way we can reach many more people, but we'll still have the opportunity to hear both from programmatic side and from the review side of things, and also leave enough time for your questions and answers. And so if you do have questions, we're asking that there's two ways to do that. Put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand when we get to that point of view. So many people ask me, who should attend these types of seminars and webinars that we give? And it's really for anybody who's interested in getting a grant. I think from the neophytes who really are just starting out in their career, want to know more about what are the opportunities and how to manage the administrative aspects of the NIH or the NCI, and from the more seasoned investigators who want new insights and new opportunities they may see. And so in order to get those insights, we put together, I think, a stellar panel here of both from a programmatic side and from the review side, and I'll have them introduce themselves when they give their presentations. So you get the full spectrum of what we do here at the NIH and how we do make our awards for grants. As I said, it's not an easy process, but we're trying to make the administrative part of it easy. The important part is the science that you come up with, the ideas that you put in your grant application, and that to get reviewed and get awarded. And so what we're trying to do here is, as much as possible, remove the technical hurdles that you may have, give you some new insights, so we're all on the same level playing field. Because there is a number of nuances in terms of getting a grant and how to apply for that. And hopefully, if you don't hear your answer as we go through the presentations, you'll feel free to answer questions now or later through emails. So I wanted to sort of say that, and let me go through my brief introduction here about the NCI. Kind of the next slide, Kim. Oh, I want to thank Kim Seifert and Claire McCarthy for actually helping us to put this together. So what I want to do is give a brief overview of NIH in general. Obviously, most of you already knows about that. Overview of the NCI, and then the grant process itself. And then we'll get right into the meat of things. So have the next slide. So as you know, the NCI is part of a large organization out of the Health and Human Services Department of the US government. The NCI is the largest institute at the NCI, and the taxpayer and Congress have been very generous with us, and with NIH in general, with an increasing budget. For 2022, we have a budget of $6.5 billion, and that gets administered in a number of ways, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The other important aspect of the organization at NIH here is CSR, the Center for Scientific Review, and that's where the majority of all grant applications get reviewed. The other institutes you see here may be of interest to you because there's some things where you may be able to get your research done through some of these other institutes. For example, if you're working on brain cancer, brain tumors, sometimes the National Institute of Neurological Disease, that's potentially where they would support some basic research in that. And so it's always good to look at these other institutes also. Next slide. So the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, we have two main uses of our funds. We support intramural research. I used to be an intramural researcher here at the NCI, and we have the extramural program where most of our money goes, and we support a number of grants. We're one of the four major extramural divisions to support extramural grants. So we do basic research, so we have a wide spectrum that we cover in terms of the science that we support. And so it's important to not only look, depending on where your research is directing you, to look at all of our divisions and where that virtually support. And any one of our program directors can help to steer you in those ways. But it's important to note that we do spend most of our money in the extramural program. Next slide. So this is what everyone should know already, is the process that we go through with this. And it really starts with the investigator, as always, and at least with our investigator-initiated research. You come up with any idea, any program that you want, or any research that you want to conduct, and then you submit that application. It goes to the Center for Scientific Review, who we'll hear from, and that gets assigned to a study section and to an institute right away. Then it goes through the study section, where many of you might have performed service on those, and a scientific review officer who manages those study sections. From there, they get a score, and that score then gets turned over to the institute where it's been assigned, and to a program director. So many of these applications, basic cancer research applications, will come to our division, and it'll be assigned to a program director. And from there, we do, based on the score, based on the programmatic aspect of what the grant is, it determines whether we're going to be able to support it or not. As you may have heard, we have pay lines that we use, but we also have some flexibility within that we're able to use and look beyond pay lines for different applications that may fulfill needs that we're looking for. And then we go to a second level review with our National Cancer Advisory Board, and then it goes to the institute director, and then it goes to another. We won't be hearing from this group today, but the Grants Management Administration and the specialist who really handles the meat and potatoes of the funding of this. And and then hopefully it goes back to the investigator. And if your research goes on, then you can compete again for a new application or for the continuation of this application. So it's this cycle process that involves a number of key aspects of the NIH and the NCI that helps manage you. And every one of these stages, you should feel the ability to ask questions, seek advice from either the scientific review officer or the program director, two of the major contacts that you'll have in your application as it works its way through. So I think the next slide shows where we're going on this webinar. And like I said, I'm very pleased we have a panel of experts here who have done every aspect from getting grants to reviewing grants to administering grants. And so with a lot of insight from Joanna Watson, who's a branch chief in our division, Amy Rubinstein, who's a branch chief at CSSR, and Shannon Hughes is the deputy director here in the division. So without any further ado, I urge you to pay attention to the next few presentations, and we look forward to all your questions that you may ask, either now, as I said before, either in the chat box or raising your hand. We'd be more than pleased to answer those. And if you have questions you want to do offline, then please address those through emails to any of us. So thanks again for attending. Hopefully you'll find this informative and useful, and I look forward to hearing your questions. I'm going to turn this over to Joanna now. I think you're muted, Joanna.
No, I'm not muted. I'm trying to look for my slides, actually. Here we go.
We all debated whether we were going to have our slides run remotely or ourselves.
Sorry, we're there. We got it. We're good to go. Slideshow. There we go. All right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan, for that introduction. Yes, my name is Joanna Watson. I'm the branch chief of the Tumor Metastasis Branch, and I'm also a program director in the Division of Cancer Biology. And what I'm going to lead you through today is our program, what we sort of do, and give you some hopefully tips that program feels are good for getting that grant from the NCI. Start. As Dan said, with every submission, your application is going to be assigned to a team of experts that will help guide your application all the way through the process. SROs are going to manage the scientific and technical review of the applications, and Amy, who's going to give a presentation after me, will give you a lot of details about that. If your application is awarded as a grant, you have a grants management specialist. They're going to be responsible for sort of the business side of things, the administrative and the fiscal aspects, and you'll also be assigned a program director throughout the life of that particular grant. As a program officer, and sometimes we refer to ourselves as program directors and sometimes program officers, those get to be used interchangeably, but we wear a variety of different hats. We wear a service hat, So we're a point of contact for information about all things grants. We serve as a liaison and an advocate for you, the investigator, to provide you with sort of various types of information. We have a major responsibility in terms of stewardship. We are considered the stewards of federal funds, which means that we are responsible for making sure that the NCI is investing in good science and that the people that we are investing that science in are doing the right things and abiding by all of the NIH and the HHS rules and responsibilities. We wear a stewardship hat in both for competing applications, which are those being reviewed, and those that we consider non-competing applications, which are those already awarded. So as I go through the presentation, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about our stewardship in terms of competing applications. The third major responsibility that we have is one of vision. That is, we identify gaps and needs, we make recommendations to the NCI leadership, we report on major advances sort of to our leadership. So not only are we providing a service to the investigators and the extramural community, but we're also providing sort of a service and that vision of letting the leadership know where we think good opportunities would lie. So with the grants process, ultimately, where should we begin? I always like to throw this out there just so that everybody realizes there's no secret formula. I spelled wrong in the title, sorry about that, but there's no secret formula for guaranteed success. You always need great science. You need a positive review outcome. It's got to abide by programmatic interest and institute policies, right? No secret formula other than those three entities. And developing good habits and understanding the granting process can really help increase the likelihood of success. There's lots of information that is available online about how to write a grant, how to prepare, those sorts of things. Always like to direct people to the NIH site for that. This will give you a good place to start. Everybody has sort of their favorite place where they like to get sort of information. But because this is the NIH, it's always going to have the latest information in terms of various policies and due dates and tips and tricks. So book tag a few grant writing websites is also going to help you along the way. As Dan sort of presented earlier, there is an application life cycle. You have to start by planning your application. An NCI program officer is always willing to talk science. We can help in terms of what you may be thinking, how best to put it, what kind of mechanism. We can also help you find an opportunity, as all grant applications have to be submitted in response to a very specific program announcement. But we also encourage you to get to know the people in your Office of Sponsored Research. They might have timelines that are different than sort of submission timelines. They may require things in a different way than you would actually know. So get to know the people in your Office of the Sponsored Research. Keep in mind that you're not going to write a grant application in just a weekend or even a week. And this planning part can take anywhere up to 8 or 9 months in terms of putting it all together. Once your application has been submitted, however, as Dan pointed out, it will be assigned, it will go through the Center for Scientific Review. They will assign it to a study section and a scientific review officer. They'll assign it to a funding institute and ultimately to a program officer as well. Keep in mind, this program officer may be a different one than whom you originally talked to when you were in the planning stage of your application. The scientific review officers are going to oversee the review of the application. If award is made, it's the grants management office and grants management specialist that's going to be involved in that. And then once your grant is active, you're back with your NCI program officer who will help oversee it all the way through. I throw this slide up just to show you that a grant application has many, many different components. During review, all of these components are going to be looked at. And this is why we want to say that planning out your application really does take time. Because if you're missing components, if they're not put together, if there's not consistency throughout the various components, that can hurt you during review. So you can contact an NIH or an NCI program officer many times in sort of the life cycle of a grant. Before submission, we can help with planning. We can help in identifying a particular funding opportunity. We can let you know about either specific requirements or policies, sort of updates. We can help with some of the scientific priorities. We can let you know what the division or the institute is sort of looking for. After the review, we can certainly help you interpret the summary statement. Program officers will attend the review meeting. We will listen. We have no part other than listening at a review meeting, but listening to the way the comments may be presented, we can help you interpret what's written in that summary statement. And obviously, we can advise you on the next steps. Should you resubmit? Is this going to be funded? All of those sorts of things are where we can provide you some advice. If your application is going to be awarded, maybe there are some issues that need to be addressed. Human subjects, vertebrate animals, data sharing, all of those sorts of things are things that we can help you with. And then once an award has actually been made, we can help you if you have questions about your progress report, if you want to make changes to it, if you've got an unobligated balance, you haven't been able to spend all of your money, if you're struggling in various ways, those are things that we can help you with. We always like to know about the scientific advances, so maybe you've got a great paper that you're really, really proud of. Let us know. You can call us, you can email us. We're always happy to talk about your science with you. After all, we are an advocate for your scientific area. But there are several things that we cannot do for you. We can't tell you how to actually do your research. We cannot give you an exemption for submission deadlines or if there's a rules violation with your application. We are not involved in anything associated with the study section, so we can't change your study section assignment. We can't change the NCI's funding policies. We can let you know what those are, but we can't change any of them. We can't change the requirements that must be fulfilled for the award itself to be issued. I can't write you a letter of recommendation, and we can't talk to anybody other than you about your application or your summary statement. So if your chairperson happens to call a program officer because they want to know, we can't give them any of that information. But there's a lot of other things that we can actually do. I want to point out that we believe all successful applications have two core elements. One is going to be the science and the scientific topic, obviously. It has to be significant, novel, an innovative science and a question under study has to be important. People have to be excited about getting this work done. And the other core element is going to be good grantsmanship, right? How the science is communicated. You have to be able to put your application together so somebody can understand what it is that you're doing, why you're doing the things that you're proposing to do, and really be excited so that they can champion that particular science and that application. I think it's also important to realize that writing a grant is different than than putting together a paper and publishing. Writing a grant, you need a prospective mindset. You've got to think about what it is that you're going to do next, and then what are you going to do subsequent to that when you have those results. So you're thinking in the future. When you're putting your papers together, you're using a retrospective mindset. We did this experiment and then we did that, right? So when you are developing your writing skills, develop the appropriate writing skill set for grant applications and for publications. And down the road, that will really help in terms of your career. It's also important to align the application components with your review criteria. You want to make it easy for the reviewers to want to champion your work. So they have a set of review criteria. By making sure your writing is very clear in all of the appropriate sections, you'll make it easy for them to address those particular review criteria. I'm going to give you some general grant writing tips. It's important to plan. You want to plan a timeline. You want to plan what your message is going to be. Your message needs to be consistent in the abstract, in the specific aims, and in the research plan. If it varies, even if you just sort of write it in a different way, you introduce the possibility of confusing the reviewers. You want to plan out your visuals. Can you come up with a schematic that shows how your aims interrelate with each other or work together to address the hypothesis that you want to propose? It's important to get substantive input and feedback from your mentors and colleagues. We're not just asking them to identify where you've missed a comma. You want them to really say, this preliminary data doesn't match what you're proposing. You want them to really give you that substantive input. You're going to need to plan what other needed preliminary data are going to make your application strong. It's important as you put it together to be explicit, to be clear, and to be concise. Don't try and be fancy putting lots of long sentences in. Make it easy for the reviewers to follow where you're going. Use visuals, detailed figure legends. A comment that we quite often hear is that, the figures look great, but I've no idea what they actually mean because there's no legend that doesn't explain what that figure is. It's also important to leave white space. Let the reviewers breathe as they're reading through your application. I will tell you a lot of times when I'm talking to especially new investigators, I will tell them, write for that reviewer who's just had a really horrible day and they have to sit down and read your application. You want your application to be so easy to read that it's really going to take all of that stress that reviewer had and that they're really going to want to champion it. It's also important to really discuss potential problem areas and provide possible solutions honestly. Take a critical look at your own work and say, we think that this could be problematic, but this is how we would go ahead and solve that problem. Read the instructions of the funding opportunity and use the correct application forms. These get updated on a regular basis. And if you're not using the correct forms, your application can actually be removed from CSR and not even go to review. So what are some of the characteristics of an outstanding grant application? Strong significance, important problem in public health. That's got to be clear. People have to absolutely know what it is and why it's important. Having high potential impact. If this work is successful, how is that either going to change the field or move the field forward? All of the outstanding grant applications have great potential for what they're going to bring. High novelty and innovation. Obviously, not all science is driven by high novelty and innovation, but wherever you can introduce that innovation in the concepts you're putting forward, in the techniques that you're using, that's always going to help you. As the applicant, you need to have a strong track record. So if you are moving into a new area, it's often beneficial to actually try and publish before you put in that grant application. You need to have clear rationale. You need to have relevant and supported preliminary data, a clear, focused approach that should lead to unambiguous results. And so the tip here is make sure that you're proposing experiments that test your hypotheses. We are not just trying to prove them, but to actually test them. That's going to lead you down a great path. And pay careful attention to the details. If you're referring to something in one way in one part of the application, don't refer to the same thing in a different part of the application differently. Pay attention to the details. So what are some of the common mistakes that people make in their grant applications? These sort of fall into two different groups. There's your scientific errors, there's your grantsmanship errors. So with the scientific errors, maybe your ideas are not new, they're not original, they're not getting the reviewers excited. Maybe you're missing acceptable scientific rationale. you're missing feasibility or preliminary data. You could have flawed approaches. I once had an application where somebody had proposed to use a knockout MDM2 mouse throughout the entire application, and the reviewer pointed out that the MDM2 knockout mouse is embryonic lethal, so they weren't going to be able to do any of the experiments that they were proposing. Maybe you lack the expertise in some essential methodology. Now, nobody expects you to be able to do absolutely everything, but make sure that your collaborators complement what expertise you are missing. So you don't want to work in a vacuum. Bring in collaborators that are going to complement and really enhance your project. And sometimes your application is either going to be too focused or too broad. It's going to be too ambitious or too unfocused. It could be descriptive and incremental. One person's descriptive nature could actually be somebody else's mechanistic approach. So this is a sort of a fine line here. But if you are proposing either a big screen or you're proposing to use single-cell RNA-seq, for example, that's fine. Those are great things to actually do. But what you want to make sure that you include in your application is how you're going to interpret those results and where you're going to go next. How are you going to prioritize the data that are going to come out of those? Obviously, there's some grantsmanship errors that could you happen to do. Not responsive to the funding opportunity, technical writing, poor writing, those sorts of things. Not presenting a good knowledge of the published relevant work is very important. You want to show that you understand what's been done before and how that impacts your work. There's some administrative elements as well that can happen when you put a grant together, but certainly anything associated with the budget really is not going to factor in to the overall score of your application. So what kind of mechanism might be right for you? Should you write an R01 or should you write for one of the smaller mechanisms? That's really going to depend on a number of things. The first thing you want to do is you want to make, if you're not sure what mechanism to do, is to reach out to a program official or a program director. Once you're talking to somebody, we can talk about your career stage, your status. Are you still an early stage investigator? How close to losing that status? We can talk about whether or not the R01 would be the appropriate mechanism to use. We can talk about how much time and budget you're going to need for the types of science that you're going to do. How much preliminary data do you have to support your premise? How much more are you going to have to generate? So there's a number of considerations into what mechanism might be right for you. But there are some myths that exist actually about the R21 mechanism. Now, this is a 2-year limited amount, no renewal type of mechanism. And a lot of times we will talk to investigators who believe that they should use the R21 mechanism to establish a research career. I will tell you that that was never the intended use. It was never meant to kick off your career by starting with an R21. Different NIH funding institutes will use the R21 in distinct ways. So if you're going to apply to the NCI or you're going to apply to NIDDK, for example, we're going to use our R21 in a different way. So you want to make sure that you reach out to that program official so that they can help you define what's the appropriate use. Certainly from the NCI point of view, there is no consideration of career stage in the funding decisions that are made for R21s. The second myth is that the R21 is less competitive than an R01. It's just a small R01 without preliminary data. This couldn't be further from the truth, both in terms of how competitive they are. They have a lower pay line. The NCI right now, the pay line for an R21 is the 9th percentile versus an 11th percentile for an established PI and a 16th percentile for an early stage investigator R01. More so, 98% of a successful R21 application includes some preliminary data. The FOAs always say that an R21 mechanism doesn't require preliminary data, but it is important to not confuse not required with not desired, because what does preliminary data do? Preliminary data is actually going to show the feasibility for the study that you are proposing. And so it's often desirable to show that where you are going with your science is in fact feasible. Some general thoughts about using different mechanisms. Don't use the R03 or the R21 mechanisms as just small mini R01 applications. Overambitiousness never works when you use the small mechanisms. You do want to use them if you want to ask an important, clearly defined research question that's going to be relevant to what the funding opportunity is calling for. I already mentioned, don't confuse not required with not desired. And regardless of the mechanism that you choose, the R01, the R03, the R21, it's important to convince the reviewers that you are uniquely poised to accomplish what it is that you're proposing. It is important for you to stress your related experience with the various elements of the proposal, what your productivity is, your collaborators' experience. I already kind of touched on, we don't want to see people just working in a vacuum. You need to build a team. That team should have collaborators that are going to complement the expertise that you bring. You want to highlight your contributions to the topic, both through publications, through abstracts. You want to present evidence of feasibility. It's going to be true of all of the mechanisms that you use, and also to present a very balanced knowledge of the literature. So that gives you an idea of what we believe makes a really good application. So if you need to find funding opportunities for your research, if they're basic cancer biology, I'm going to direct you to our website. You can also follow us on Twitter, where there'll be some basic cancer biology news. Funding opportunities are also pointed there. And if you're looking for opportunities to support your trainees and students and scientists, the NCI has a variety of different sources: the Center for Cancer Training, the Center to Reduce Cancer Health Disparities, particularly if you've got students and scientists from populations that are underrepresented in biomedical science. And then there's also the Center for Global Health, who issue awards intended for mentoring training in global cancer research. And with that, it is a speeding through what a program officer does and some tips about grantsmanship. And I'll be happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation.
Great. Thanks a lot, Joanna. It's a lot of great information there. I think I've seen every one of those common mistakes before on a different grant applications that didn't get funded. And as you said, we're going to hear from Amy now. And while we work closely with the CSR, it's really a separation of church and state sort of thing where we attend those reviews, but really they're totally independent and we don't have any influence over how they review the application. So Amy, if you're ready.
I can start to share my slides. Can everybody see my slides?
That looks good.
Okay, good. I don't see it on mine. So, okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about peer review at NIH, as Dan and Joanna mentioned. I'm going to give it just a start with a quick overview of the application process. As Joanna mentioned, there are a number of steps involved. You do need to, we like to remind people that you should be prepared well in advance to submit your application, not even including the time you spent preparing the proposal, because you do need to register with grants.gov and ERA Commons. You need to find your funding opportunity announcement, prepare your application, of course, and submit via your organizational representative. And you should use ERA Commons to view and track your application at all of these processes. So this next slide just is a reminder how not to submit a late application, because there are only certain extenuating circumstances in which a late application will be allowed, and there is no error correction window that will extend that deadline. So remember that the applications need to be accepted twice, once through grants.gov and then again by NIH. There are often a lot of applications being submitted at the same time near the deadline, so that may slow processing time. And to be on time, it has to be submitted error-free by 5 p.m. local time on the due date. So just remember that, and keeping that in mind starting early is always better. And keep track of your application throughout the process. Your organizational representative may be submitting the application, but you're responsible as the project director for the accuracy of the submission. So don't wait for emails. Go check your application on ERA Commons. Make sure that it's accurate. Make sure it's everything's there. And that's why, again, starting early is important, because if you notice something wrong, you still have time to correct the application. Remember, it's your career, and this is what's on the line. So you should really take responsibility to make sure the application is submitted correctly. So once it gets to CSR, the applications are assigned to study sections. Many of them, R01s and R21s, will be assigned to standing panels, where the subject matter of the application matches our referral guidelines, which are published on the CSR website. Or they may also be reviewed in a special emphasis panel that could be either because it doesn't fit into a study section, or it's for a special initiative, or maybe there may be conflicts of interest with standing study section members. Various reasons why an application might be assigned to a special emphasis panel. The assignment request form can be used to suggest assignment to your suggestions for assignment to a study section and to institutes. You can also use this form to identify potential conflicts of interest and list areas of expertise needed to evaluate the application. But one thing you should never do is suggest specific reviewers, names of people, because then that would basically suggest that those people may be in conflict with your application. So how would you decide what institute you might be interested in? If you go to use the matchmaker tool on the NIH reporter site, you can copy your abstract and aims and actually look for institutes that fund research in your area, and it'll list funded grants and links to program officers. To get to the right study section, you can go to CSR's website and either enter a keyword search or use the assist referral tool. Now, these are, I would say, these are tools that you can use to identify potential places. And I actually deliberately use the word suggestion because the final decisions for where things are assigned are made by the branch chiefs. And there may be lots of factors involved in why whatever you suggested is not appropriate for one reason or another. If you do get assigned to a study section that is not what you were expecting or you don't think is correct, you should always feel free to reach out to the branch chiefs who are making those decisions, because they're handling a very high volume of applications that come through. Mistakes can be made, and if you have a good scientific reason for why your application should be in a different panel, then we're always willing to hear you out and have that discussion with you. The cover letter, even though the assignment request form is now the preferred method for suggesting study sections and institutes, you can still use a cover letter for various reasons to explain why an application is late, because there are some reasons that you can submit an application late, for emergencies, illnesses, study section service. There are various reasons that you can submit an application late, up to 2 weeks. You can use the cover letter to provide notice of plans to submit a video. You can also use it for pre-approvals and identify your project as gathering large-scale genomic data. But again, don't use the cover letter to suggest specific reviewers. Before the study section meeting, once it's assigned to a panel, each application, the scientific review officer is the person handling your application. This person will assign 3 or more reviewers 5 to 6 weeks in advance. And these reviewers will assess your application. They will provide a preliminary overall impact score, criterion scores for each of the 5 core review criteria, comment on the appropriateness of your budget, and provide a written critique. At the meeting, approximately 50% of applications will be discussed. Applications that are unanimously judged by the review committee to be in the lower half are generally not discussed. And again, this is a unanimous decision, so any one reviewer on the panel who wants to discuss an application can do so. However, and members that are in conflict with an application have leave the room and are not involved in the decision to discuss or not discuss an application. Clustering of review, new investigator R1s are generally reviewed in a separate cluster, and sometimes other grant mechanisms as well will be separately. The order of review is then randomized within those clusters. I want to spend a moment to discuss reviewing rigor and transparency. You've probably heard a lot about that in recent years, and it's become an important part of the review process. Some of these elements include the rigor of the prior research, which can apply to either the significance or the approach criteria. And this applies to what's been done in the field previously and whether that was done in a rigorous way, essentially. Then the scientific rigor of the research strategy is part of the approach. Consideration of relevant biological variables, including sex as a biological variable, also is included in the approach. And then there's the authentication of key biological and/or chemical reagents. Now, this is not a score driving issue, but it is required. And if the reviewers are asked to comment on whether it's appropriate and whether there may be additional things that need to be included to show that you're authenticating reagents appropriately. Scoring. So how do we ask reviewers to score? This is our scoring guidance that we give to reviewers. The overall impact of an application is defined by us as the likelihood for a project to exert a sustained, powerful influence on the research field involved. And this is going to be based on those 5 criteria. If something which is significance, investigator, innovation, approach, and environment. So the scores are, of course, 1 to 9. 1, 2, and 3 are considered high impact. 4, 5, and 6 medium, and 7, 8, or 9 is low impact. So for an application to be scored in the 1 to 3 range, they must be addressing a problem of high importance or interest in the field, and they may have some or no technical weaknesses. So the significance, how important the research project is going to be very important, is whether it gets a high overall impact score. When you get to medium impact, if there are a lot of issues with the approach, for example, or if there are problems with the investigator, that may bring down a high impact idea down to the medium range, or it may be that the idea itself is in the medium range. 7 to 9, then again, is in the low impact. They can be a moderate or high importance to the field, but there may be other weaknesses. One thing to keep in mind is that a 5 is actually considered a good medium impact application, and we tell reviewers to start with a 5, and then if they see things that are especially good about it, they will move it closer to a 1. Things that are worse may move it down. So keep in mind that they are reviewing a large number of applications, and we are always trying to get them to differentiate between the very best and ones that may be good, but not the very best. So this is just a reiteration of much of what Joanna talked to you about earlier. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but these are the kinds of things that reviewers are going to be looking for in applications. And then, of course, some of the common problems that cause reviewers to give a lower score is a lack of a strong scientific foundation, lack of good new original ideas, lack of a good scientific rationale, a very unfocused or research plan that doesn't have sufficient detail, not being knowledgeable about the published relevant work. A lot of things that can cause the reviewers may question in a proposal. So following the review, you will receive a summary statement. Every summary statement has criterion scores for the review criteria, including critiques from assigned reviewers and any administrative notes. If your application was discussed, you will also receive an overall impact priority score and a percentile ranking. Summary, and then a summary of the review discussion, which is prepared by the scientific review officer that's handling the meeting. So keep in mind that the scientific review officer's job is to oversee the meeting and make sure that your application receives a fair and expert review. And they're the ones that will be listening to make sure the reviewers are not saying things that are inappropriate or using criteria that are inappropriate to the review of an application. Following the meeting, though, the person that you should talk to is your program officer. They will have the prime responsibility to answer questions about the review and about preparing a new application. Quick word about resubmission. After an unsuccessful A0 application or an unsuccessful A1, you may submit a new application. If you have an unsuccessful A0, you don't have to submit an A1. You can do it. You can send it in as brand new if you wish, or you can do it as a resubmission, which is A1. But the things that we will not the things that we will not accept is if they overlap an already funded application, or simultaneous submissions of an overlapping application. So if you've submitted, if you have an application under review and you have not yet received the summary statement, then that would be too early to submit the same aims as a different application. And there's a link here that can give you more answers to questions about resubmission. Keep in mind that if you write something as new, as a new A0 application, then it must be written as new. You can't refer to a previous review, can't mention the previous score or the previous reviewer's comments, or whether it's responsive. No text, no marks in the text to indicate changes. It has to be a brand new application. And it can't include a progress report, because if it's not a renewal, then it should not have a progress report, even if it's similar. The topics are similar to a previously submitted renewal. Quickly want to mention the CSR Early Career Reviewer Program. This is a good opportunity for brand new investigators who have not yet received R01 funding to learn about how review happens. I think that's probably the best way to learn about the process is to actually participate. You can learn how reviewers actually evaluate and score applications, and help the NIH scientific community at the same time by actually participating in the process. So there's a link there to show you more information about getting involved in the ECR process. There's investigators need to apply and be accepted into it before SROs can invite you to a meeting. A couple things I wanted to add as I conclude to mention. The NIH guide notice, anytime NIH changes policy, which you probably know happens, can happen all the time, changes to submission deadlines, changes to requirements. Anytime that happens, it's communicated through the NIH guide notice, and that's the link here shows you where you can go to look for those notices. You can also subscribe and then get notifications about emails about any changes. And I say this because it's very important, because not knowing about a policy change is not an acceptable reason for not following that policy. So if we have communicated it through an NIH guide notice, then you're expected to follow that policy. So good thing to be aware of, since policies do change. So I want to also mention who can answer your questions before you submit the application. The program officer, as Joanna talked to you about, scientific review officer can give you information about the study sections that they run. After you submit, and before the review happens, the scientific review officer is the person to talk to. And then after your review, it's the assigned program officer. There's some more information there. I also want to mention that reporting bias in peer review, and this is something that CSR takes very seriously. And one thing I would add, in addition to bias, is review integrity is another very important issue. We emphasize confidentiality and avoidance of conflicts of interest in the review process. If you become aware of a breach of confidentiality, we certainly want to hear about it, because the only way we can stop this sort of thing from happening is if you tell us. So, certainly that you can contact the research integrity officer at CSR or your scientific review officer if you find out about anything like this. Bias in peer review, Dr. Fosu is the associate director for diversity and workforce development, and if you have any concerns about bias in the review system, or if you're concerned about respectful interactions, anything that you think could have affected the fairness of the review process, he's the person to talk to. Although you can always, again, I encourage you to talk to your SRO or anyone else if you have any questions or concerns about the way we do these things. And you know, our policy regarding potentially flawed or biased reviews, we do sometimes re-review applications if we consider it to be a flawed review based on the evidence. So I certainly encourage you to reach out if you have any concerns. Then there's final slides with some more links to further information and a top 10 NIH peer review question and answers. So these are all just more sources for information.
Great. Thanks a lot, Amy. A lot of good information there. You see a lot of the same common mistakes that Amy identified that Joanne also identified from the programmatic side. So those are things you really want to pay attention to. So I want to turn this over now to Shannon, Deputy Director here in the division, who will take the question and answer period.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks very much, Joanna and Amy, for just wonderful talks. And I hope, Dan, you'll stay on the camera too so we can throw some questions your way. I'm going to start with a couple that came in the chat box. Thanks to everyone who's entering some questions there now. The first one, or the first couple, are from Vincent. I think maybe Amy, you could take the first one to talk about policy, and then Joanna thinking about how to establish a track record of publication. But Vincent asks about if he's a co-I, so a co-investigator on an R01 or an R21, would that negate an ESI status?
So if a can you repeat that? It's a co-investigator,
Yep, a co-investigator on an R01 or an R21 instead of.
So that will not. Being a co-investigator will not. Being a multi-PI, though, will. So be sure you're clear about what your role is on the application.
Thank you.
Actually, I think this is really important, but I think it's also important for ESIs to know when their ESI status ends, and to check with your program staff. Forgive me for the background noise. And check with your program staff to make sure that you will be eligible all the way through, both terms submission and by the time the grant is or could be funded.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joanna. And I'll also add to that to say that if you think you qualify for an extension of your ESI time period, don't wait till the very end to make those requests. Do that early so that you know when your ESI status will definitely be ending. The next question we have is about abstract publications versus scientific papers. Sometimes we'll see this in more engineering-based fields or mathematics and others where abstracts are published, not just scientific papers. Joanna, do you think that those can lend credence to a strong track record for the applicant?
I do. I think if that's the only thing that you have, that would raise some issues. Obviously, if it's all technology, maybe that would be acceptable. But I think if including abstracts that you're presenting at conferences shows that you can define a project, you can sort of carry it through. But you're obviously going to also need that you can get that published and sort of peer reviewed as well. So I think that those are good things to include, especially for people starting their new lab, because that's going to take some time for you to really get that data for a full publication. But if that was your only thing, I would be a little bit concerned.
And maybe skipping a couple of questions here to ask one that's similar. Someone's asking about what's expected to renew an R01. So productivity that reviewers will be looking for in a renewal. Do you have a comment about that, Joanna?
Productivity, yeah. If you had you've had a grant for 5 years, and if you have no publications out of that, that's going to not be, at least in my opinion, Amy can sort of chime in as well. I think that would be problematic. What's acceptable obviously lies in the eye of the reviewer. Some like lots of publications, some like high quality. Well, everybody likes high quality, but publications in sort of high impact. But I think realistically, not everybody can publish always in the highest of uh, highest impact journals. And therefore, I think you want to show that you have been productive, that you have accomplished what you set out to, and that you have delivered it to the community.
I think, Shannon, if I may, I think this also goes to the timing of when you either submit your initial grant or submit your renewal. While these are 5-year awards, you have to time that out, but the timing may be such that when you have a lot of publications out there, the timing may be to go a little early that you do that. And even an application that you're sending in for the first time, if you're having a great year, then you may want to try to get it in then when you have a lot of publications that you can show.
Yeah, and again, I'll add one more thing here. I've seen a lot of success with folks who are citing their bioarchive papers, so posting preprints, and reviewers are going to look at preprints. So if you have you've got something in review, that's a way to show the reviewers that you're on your way to having a publication there. I'm going to take one more question from the chat box and then turn to Tony and unmute him to let him ask his question. But first, Amy, someone asked about A1s and how much turnover there is in study sections and how many different reviewers do you try to have look at an A1 with regards to who looked at it first?
It's an excellent question, and I think it's sort of changed. It has resulted in a change of how we generally do things because we want to make sure everybody gets a fair chance. And so essentially we don't, because it's impossible to get the same reviewers back from one meeting to the next. It's really not even possible because there may be people in conflict in the new round. They may not be available. There's just lots of reasons. And so for that reason, we don't try to reassign the same people to an application. We just simply go on based on what expertise is necessary for the application and assign it based on that. And the reviewers are instructed, though, the summary statements are available to them, and they're instructed to address how well the A1 has responded to the previous criticisms. However, again, that's just one review criteria out of everything. Although they are going to assess that, how well they responded, they're going to score the application based on their own assessment of the likelihood for impact in the field and other aspects of the review.
Thank you. Tony, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, yes. This is Tony Datsoro from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. So one of my questions is, being also a reviewer myself, I know we are instructed that when we give a score, right, to the key aspect, like significance, approach, investigator, if there is no weakness, should be either a 1 or 2. Sometimes even happen to me, if the review see no weakness, they still give a 3 as a score. And I think this, of course, will impact, right, the overall score at the end. So I don't know how it's possible to prevent this. Do you think sometimes can be just an overlook by the reviewer? Or?
Actually, how we instruct the reviewer is that they should be scoring based on strengths as well as weaknesses. So it's not just about the weaknesses. A lack of weaknesses doesn't make it necessarily a 1. So, we try to emphasize all of these things, the potential for impact on the field. Is it, really truly exceptional or outstanding? So it's not, so again, it's not just about the weaknesses, it's also about the strengths. And in the end, it's going to be up to the reviewer's judgment. And they're looking at every reviewer is assigned to, 8 or 9 applications and even beyond that, they're reviewing, probably discussing maybe 30 applications in a meeting. And they have to, to some extent, they're not doing direct comparisons of applications to each other, but they are sort of thinking, how much impact is this going to have based compared to other things in the same field? So that, to some extent, that's also again, strengths as well as weaknesses that are considered.
Correct. Thank you very much. I appreciate your answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you, Amy, for that answer. There are a few different questions here about ESI applications. The first one is about whether or not there's an advantage or a disadvantage to having a senior PI as a collaborator on an application when you are named, a single ESI application. I wonder if Dan or Joanna, if one of you has a thought on that.
Yeah, I think it can cut both ways, unfortunately. I think sometimes when you're trying to establish your independence, having, especially if you've someone from your previous lab, a mentor or something on there, can sort of undercut your ability to show independence in that sense. But again, as I think you've heard already, if you need a complement there into your research and what you're being able to do, then it's probably useful to have someone on there as a co-PI. But it's a tricky situation when you're trying to establish your independence, to have a co-investigator who either has been your mentor or been part of a similar lab. Joanna, do you?
I would agree with that, and I would say that's where the letter of support. As a co-investigator, they don't have to necessarily provide a letter of support, but if they're listed as a co-investigator and they were a previous mentor, including one is not going to hurt the chances, and the established, experienced person can really explain how they are now, the applicant is independent and can really sort of lay out the land as to who's doing what and whose ideas. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank everyone for all of these questions. We're capturing them in the chat, and we can perhaps put together a frequently asked questions or answer to these questions that we'll post with the slides, because it is 3:00 and our time is up. But I want to give one more question to Amy. If she can give a little bit of information about the reorganization of some of the oncology study sections where people can find some additional information on that, I think would be useful for a lot of people on the call.
Yeah, so several of the as you mentioned, several of the basic and therapeutic study sections were recently reorganized. The new guidelines for the new panels should be posted now if you go to CSR's website. The reviewers, you won't see rosters for these new panels yet, but those decisions, so the guidelines are for the June, for all these new study sections are for the June 5th deadline. So you should look at the guidelines determining, where to suggest your application be reviewed. You're not going to be able to see rosters because they won't be available till I think August 1st is what we're aiming for in terms of having those rosters available. The decisions are now being made with the various review staff as to which reviewers are going to go to which panels from the previous panels. And the reviewers will find out sooner, but they won't be published on the website till August 1st.
So I think
does that my answer my question, or is there another?
There are several questions about that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that people not only visit the CSR website to read the description of the new panels, but also feel free to reach out to the program directors in the Division of Cancer Biology, who can also give some information about the reorganization. And always feel free to reach out to program directors, program officers, scientific review officers. I think that's a big takeaway from both Joanna and Amy's presentations today. So I apologize that we weren't able to get to nearly, not that many questions. Again, we'll try to answer them and post them with the slides when the slides are posted on the Division of Cancer Biology website. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we do this as an annual event, hopefully at the AACR meeting. So join us next year, hopefully in person, to have even more questions answered, get more information. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.